Wait. Let's get started so we stay punctual. Okay. My name is Danny Sheehan, and I'm the instructor in this course. This is Cowell 126, but it's also important to understand, and I want you to tell your friends this week that this course has also been authorized for full credit toward your major in history, politics, legal studies, sociology, and philosophy. So I know a lot of the students want to make sure that they get as many of the courses as you can toward your major. So it's important that I want you to talk with your friends about this, because I want to see if we can get as large a group as we can of students so that we can have a kind of a diversity of opinion in the class, because there's going to be a lot of issues in the class that you're going to find surprising, and some people might find controversial, and it would be good to have some people in the class who undertook to controvert some of the things we're going to be studying about, because it lends a little bit more energy to the process, and it allows us to go into greater detail in explaining the evidence and the data behind what it is that we're saying. If there are people who aren't persuaded very quickly about it. So that there are three things that I'd like to do, three tasks I'd like to achieve here today in our first class. The first one is to persuade you, to each of you, if you could, get two of your friends and classmates to at least come to the next class to begin to find out about what this course is going to be about. That if each of you will bring two folks with you, I think that especially when they discover that they can get credit toward their major in each of these different 5 departments, that it's going to help them decide that they might want to participate in the class. Otherwise, it's going to be, it'll remain largely almost a seminar with the dozen or so of you that'll be here. And usually we have anywhere from 36 to 50 students in this particular course. And this particular course is called The Trajectory of Justice in America. And it's a generic title for the course, but it deals with different subjects each time. This is the 4th time that I've taught this course, and the content of the course is different each time. That we explain the sort of present status of politics and legal matters in the history of the United States that pertain to what's going on right now. For example, later today, after we go through a lot of the administrative stuff here, we're going to open with a discussion of the election that's going on right now. A colorful subject this time around, but we want to kind of ground our perspective as we go on in the class to the real event that's taking place right now, and that is selecting a new president of the United States, and there'll be basically almost an entirely new administration, and there'll be some changes in policy. Hopefully not as radical as some of the people propose, but that it'll give us a context in which to analyze what the subject matter is of the course. So that's the first thing that I'd like to do is to go over some of the administrative details for you so we can get those out of the way. As I said, the first and most important thing is that the course is available for credit towards your major. if you're in history or politics or legal studies or sociology or philosophy. Now, but you do need to just file an application, a petition with your department. I've already talked with the department heads. They've already agreed that they can give permission to count the course toward credit for your major. But again, I want you to explain that to your friends, so that, because most people don't know that, because those agreements hadn't been in place at the time they published the catalog and the announcement of the course. So it makes it a much more attractive course for the kids. Okay. Also, a second point is that there's no final exam in this course. It's not one of those kind of courses where you have to become terrified about being able to remember all the dates and times and places and events and try to cram them in and spew them forth into a blue book. The point of this course is to actually familiarize you with things that you would probably never ever find out about, but for your taking this course. It's perfectly clear that a lot of the things you're going to find out about, you'd never find out about, not only not during your career at the university, but ever. So that what I want you to do is I want you to become familiar with this history, with the data that supports it, the sources that you would need to look at to confirm that what I'm telling you is actually what has happened in history. And so I don't want you to be feeling that you're obliged to have to memorize all of this stuff and be able to kind of regurgitate it to us. So that the actual grading in the course, 50% of your entire grade is going to be based upon a final mini thesis that I'm going to be asking you to do at the end of the course during exam week, or before, if you're preparing it as you're going along during the course, to submit it at the end of exam week. A paper that will be from 15 to 20 pages long, setting forth a specific thesis that you have. And I see this as sort of preparatory for any potential graduate work that you would do at the graduate school level, whether you pursue a master's degree or a PhD degree, or whether you even go to law school, that this is preparatory for that, for you to get your head around an entire aspect of American history and indeed world history that is going to be important for you as a building block for your understanding of the larger fields of any of these 5 fields. So the preparation of this mini thesis is the major objective in the course, other than you learning the stuff itself. And now another 30% of the course is going to be 2 interim papers or essays that I'm going to have you write. One at the end of the 3rd week, one at the end of the 6th week, that will be, and they can be building toward your thesis. They can be selecting an aspect of what your ultimate thesis is going to be that you want to go into a little more depth about. And those will be from 5 to 8 page essays. And they will count 30% of your grade. So with 50% of the grade for the final paper, which is divided 40% for the final paper and 10% for your initial outline that we're going to have you submit prior to your sitting down to write your final paper. But the mini thesis will be 50% of the grade. 30% of the grade will be made up of the 2 shorter essays, and then the other 20% is going to be based upon your attendance and participation in the lectures and in the discussion period that we're going to have Thursday evenings. So that we meet Tuesdays and Thursdays from 4 to basically 6. And then on Thursday, following the second lecture in the week, we have an hour and 15-minute discussion. And you will note that there'll be people in the class that appear to be a bit older than you, who are long-time learners at the university, that this course has been open to long-time learners to come and attend this class. And you'll discover that as the quarter goes on, you'll start to see more and more of these people who are starting to come in, because they'll discover that the course is going on, and then they'll be coming in. Now they are not going to be participating in the questions and answers during the lecture, and they will not be in attendance or participating in the discussion session. That's solely for all the students, the undergraduate students, so that we can form positions, and that you'll see that that'll tend to develop during the course, that there'll be individual students who will tend to ask questions usually from a particular perspective, or raise challenges from a particular perspective totally appropriately. And so that the class will tend to kind of develop along different lines of inquiry. There may be some people in here who are very progressive. There may be some people that are very conservative, some people that are kind of self-consciously moderate in your positions, and those will start to manifest themselves during the course. But I want you to feel free to make all the inquiries that you want, because I want what we're going to be covering in the course to be meaningful for you. I want it to relate to what your worldview really is. So you can ask questions in addition to the information that I set forth in the initial lecture. You can ask specific questions so that you can try to gather more and more information, so you can determine how what I'm talking about relates to your worldview. And we will have a discussion during the course of actual worldviews and what the underlying predicates for a particular worldview are, so that you can start to actually get some kind of a sense of perhaps of what your worldview is, that you may not have formulated a fully developed worldview yet at this stage, since you're still in the process of your education. So they say that these essays, the two essays, and the final mini thesis are going to constitute the substance of your work here, in addition to the questions and answers that you're going to be engaged in to gather the kind of information you want by means of which to prepare the papers. But I would anticipate that the papers that you prepare in this class are going to be the kind that you might wish to submit as writing samples, for example, in your applications for graduate school or law school, that they'll be of that kind of import and interest, I think, to people. Okay? So, in one final note, and it's probably not necessary to say it, but we've had in the past, this is the 6th course I've taught at the university level, and I have had some experiences in the past where people hand in an essay which has clearly been prepared for some other class, and that they prepared and handed in another class. I would ask you not to do that, primarily because you won't get any credit for it. And so I don't think you should do that. I've had to do that with regard to a couple students in the past. Just say, look, it's perfectly clear that this was written for some completely different course. It's just barely have anything to do with anything we talked about all year. And so you don't get any credit for that. So don't fall prey to that temptation. I don't think you will. Now, an additional point that virtually all of the readings that you're going to have for this course, and they'll be divided into kind of required readings and optional readings. And they'll virtually all be available as hyperlinks on the internet. That this curriculum, or the syllabus that you have in your hand, we've printed it out so you'll have a physical one you can carry around with you. But it's also available on the internet, and so you can get it, and the hyperlinks are interactive, so you can just click onto the reading and it'll come up and you can read it, print it out if you want, and carry it around. But they'll all be available. There's a couple books that are so interesting that you may very well want to get access to the full book. And so we will, in that case, make it available at the library on reserve for you. There'll be a few of those. Now, for example, many of you may have read already, which, by the way, how many of you are seniors here? Okay, and how many are juniors? And sophomores? Any freshmen here? Great. Okay, good. See, we got a good spread here of students. Okay, so that if you haven't read anything yet, you probably will end up in one or another course reading the People's History of America, or People's History of the United States, that was written by, what's it? Howard Zinn, exactly right. So students are supposed to jump on that. You're supposed to go, oh, there's a chance. Howard Zinn. Okay, Howard Zinn has written this fabulous book on the People's History of the United States, and it talks about all kinds of things in there that you aren't going to be told about in most universities. This is a different university to some extent, so there's a higher possibility that you've been assigned readings out of it prior to this time. But that's one of the examples that you might want to get to see the whole book, because I've assigned a few sections specifically about the robber baron era and the rise of these major tycoons that ended up, having this undue influence on the policies of the United States because of bribing senators and congressmen and other less admirable tactics. But the bottom line is that's one of the kind of books you might want to get a longer look at. There's another one that is called The Nazi Hydra in America. And that is quite an extraordinary book. And there'll be 2 or 3 different reading assignments out of the book. And you may find them of adequate interest to actually motivate you to want to see the whole book. And so that there'll be a few books that we'll put on reserve at the library so you can do further reading, either in direct connection with the preparation of your essays and your thesis, or just because you really want to know about it. And there's going to be also, we haven't included them all in yet in the syllabus, but there's going to be some videos that you're going to get a chance to see, which have to do with previous courses that I've taught, both here and at UC Santa Barbara. That, for example, there are full 90-minute lectures on a particular event that we'll touch upon here in the course, and spend maybe 5 to 8 minutes on it, but that there exists entire 90-minute lectures on the details of that particular event. So that if you find that that's an event that you might choose to write about in some more detail in your essays or your thesis, you may want to get access to those. And so that we'll have those available as well. One of these includes the detailed analysis of the assassination of President Kennedy. That those are not available. Those have been sort of sequestered because actually I'm in the process of writing a book about those. Those are all available for you as the students, but they're not available generally to the public. But those are, for example, there's 3 final lectures in we had an entire course on the assassination of President Kennedy, an entire 10-week course with 20 full 2-hour lectures on it that reviewed the various theories of the assassination of the president. And then in the final 3 lectures, we actually told what happened in detail. And you may want to have access to those while you're doing your thesis. It depends upon what role that aspect of the course, this course, plays in your thesis. Okay, so let me go over generally now. Those are the administrative aspects of the course. Tuesdays and Thursdays, 4 to 5:45, with discussion groups at 6, from 6 to 7:15 on Thursday. And we do have to go over to another room. Apparently this room is taken by someone else on Thursdays, starting at 6. And so we will go over to Porter College in room 148. You'll see it at the top of the syllabus there. But we'll have 15 minutes to wander around over there and then do our discussion over there. Now, one last point, that all of the lectures are going to be videoed here with a two camera shoot, videoed, including the questions and answers that we have, and those will be available for you. Okay, so that you don't have to. It may help you to be taking notes while I'm talking about a particular subject. May help you remember it. That it works for some people that way. But the fact is, you will have the lectures available for you if you want to take a look at them later and focus on taking notes at that point in time, remembering what some of the things are that you really wanted to remember in a little more detail. Okay? So what's going to happen in this course is we're going to be talking as rulers of the realm, and this is actually the second book in a trilogy that I've been asked to write by Counterpoint Press out of Berkeley, California. The first book that I wrote, they ended up calling The People's Advocate, which was a general discussion 1 mile wide and about 1 foot deep on a number of the cases that I've done, a number of which have gone all the way to the United States Supreme Court. It talked about the story behind those cases, the issues that were involved in those cases, how it came to pass that I was one of the attorneys in those cases, et cetera. And so that's book one. And we taught a whole course here called 8 Cases That Changed America. And if for any reason any of you want to know more about those cases, those are available too. And that if you ask about any of those, then we can make those available for you, either put them up on eCommons or otherwise. And they involve, for example, the Pentagon Papers case that I was one of the attorneys for the New York Times in the publishing of the Pentagon Papers, the 47 volumes of top secret classified internal Pentagon studies that were done as to the cause and method of prosecuting the war in Vietnam. The public revelation of which is uniformly recognized by historians as one of the major factors in bringing the Vietnam War to a more rapid conclusion. I also was I was in F. Lee Bailey's office, attorney in Boston, that we represented James McCord, one of the Watergate burglars in the Watergate burglary, that he was the wiretap specialist, former CIA wiretapping specialist, who ended up blowing the whistle on Richard Nixon, leading directly to the articles of impeachment that were returned from the Judiciary Committee of the House of Representatives and led to the immediate resignation of Richard Nixon. And those, the revelations that were behind the Watergate burglary, that we helped participate in getting McCord to communicate to the judge in that particular case, are part of what led to the impaneling of the Church Committee, a very famous set of hearings in front of the United States Senate, the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence Abuse, chaired by Senator Frank Church from Idaho, that revealed all of the massive criminality on the part of the Central Intelligence Agency, not including the heroin smuggling, which they didn't actually get to, but did cover assassinations of foreign leaders, blackmail, and other things that they were engaged in. And I also was lead counsel in the Iran-Contra case that basically led to the revelation of the off-the-shelf, standalone, self-financing, private covert operation enterprise that was allegedly put together by Lieutenant Colonel Oliver North, the deputy director of the National Security Council for Anti-Terrorism. That was that whole brouhaha that went on probably before you were born, many of you. But anyway, so there are a series of large-scale cases like that, including the Karen Silkwood case that I was lead counsel on, that revealed the smuggling of 98% pure bomb-grade plutonium out of a nuclear facility in the United States to Israel and Iran for the construction of nuclear weapons. And that case led to the United States Supreme Court decision that declared unconstitutional the financial cap that had been imposed by Congress on the amount of damages that an American citizen could recover from a private nuclear facility for the escape of radioactive materials from the nuclear facility. And with the removal of that financial cap that Congress had attempted to impose, there have been no more private nuclear power plants either ordered or built in the United States since that decision. So there are a series of these, 8 or 10 of these cases that I was involved in that actually are part of the reason why I know a lot about what the things are that I know about. And that you're in I might say, privileged position here to be now in a position to find out what these things are. These are things that I discovered in the context of professional investigations that I led when I was legal counsel in those cases. Now, in order for you to persuade your 2 friends to come and join you in this class so that we will fill in the middle of our little classroom here, and then you can have the elder, wise other people out around the edges, that I want to give you some sales pitch stuff that you have for them. You can tell them if they come and participate in this course, they're going to find out who actually, in fact, killed President Kennedy. They're also going to find out who green-lighted that operation and how it is that I came to know about this, so that you will see that, in fact, we do know, that it's not just some hypothetical or some theory that people have pulled out, that this is from direct first-hand information from first-hand people. And you're also going to find out, very importantly, a major theme of this course is the fact that there is now, has been throughout the recent past, and has been for a substantial portion of the entire history of our country, a fairly small group of men who, from behind the scenes, actually control the foreign and domestic policies of the United States government. You've suspected it before. You've talked to people who suspect it, and that there are people in the shadows who actually affect unto a point of controlling the policies of the United States. And that is sort of a principal theme of this course that you're going to be finding out about. You're also going to find out about what the role is that those particular people who were in those positions of power back in 1963 played in the assassination of President Kennedy. You're also going to find out the role that they played in the planning and carrying out of the Watergate burglary. You're going to discover why in the world those people were in the Democratic National Headquarters, burglarizing their offices, which seemed so patently ridiculous and was characterized by Richard Nixon as a third-rate burglary, which we will find out was no such thing. You will also find out the role that these people all played in bringing about the resignation of President Nixon after the Watergate break-ins. You'll find out the relationship between these men and Lyndon Johnson, who ended up becoming President of the United States when President Kennedy was murdered. You'll find out what the relationship of these men was with the criminal activities of the Central Intelligence Agency that were the subject matter of the Church Committee hearings of the United States Senate. You'll find out what the role of these people was with regard to the Warren Commission that fabricated this theory that President Kennedy and Texas Governor John Connally had been shot with a single bullet, the so-called magic bullet that you've heard about. You'll get all of the information and evidence, indisputable evidence, that was not the case, that in fact that they were shot by separate bullets, fired by separate gunmen, and it will then lead you to a deeper understanding of that assassination and in how it happened and why. You're also going to be studying in this course. Now, this is all by means of you telling your friends if they want to find out about this. Now, I mean, if they don't care about it, then you don't want them in this class anyhow. But if they care about this, you know, if they are warm and breathing, if they care about this type of information, you might suggest that they might want to come and take the course, especially if they are majoring in one of these 5 areas in which they can get direct credit for the course toward their major. You'll find out about what role these people played in the creation of the Central Intelligence Agency, intimately involved in proposing the creation of the CIA and in constructing the CIA and running the CIA. Sophia, we were going to hold a whole class for you. No, you're all set. Don't worry. Come on, sit right down. Sit right down. Get right in here where I can see you if you raise your hand and have any questions. Okay? All right. Thank you, dear. And you're also going to find out, very surprisingly, the role that these men played in financing the rise to power of Adolf Hitler in Germany. And you're going to find the details, again, beyond dispute, of these people providing the financing for the construction of the national headquarters for the Third Reich in Germany. And you're going to also find out about the role these people played in establishing the heroin supply operations coming from Southeast Asia through Cuba, through a private company called the Sea Supply Corporation, SEA, the Sea Supply Corporation, which stands for the Southeast Asian Supply Corporation, run by a fellow by the name of Paul Helliwell, full-time, tenured, pensioned CIA official, running the heroin importation into Cuba under Batista, the dictator that was overthrown by Castro. You're going to find out about the role that these men in the shadows played in establishing that particular heroin trafficking. You're also, very importantly, going to start finding out about the critical and central role that was played by Cuba, which was the center for the smuggling into this heroin, which was being sold by the mafia under a man by the name of Santos Trafficante, who's one of our sources, actually, on this, who was a client for the law firm where I happen to work, who gave us this information. You'll find out about the secret history of Cuba itself and what a central role it played in the history of the 1960s, including the assassination of President Kennedy, and how we, if you haven't heard about it yet, how we came to the very brink of total thermonuclear war during the Cuban Missile Crisis on the night of October 18th and 19th of 1962. And you'll also find out about the role that these men played in reversing the frames of the famous Zapruder film of the assassination of President Kennedy, reversing the frames published in Life magazine to make it look like the president, when he was shot, that he fell forward when he was shot, whereas in fact he fell backwards and off to the left, evidencing the fact that he had been shot from the grassy knoll and struck in the forehead and blown out the back of his head, instead of being hit, which are completely false autopsy photos showing a pencil-thin bullet hole in the back of his head that are completely fraudulent. And you will get the details of why that is clearly so. And you will find out about the role played by these men in the shadows in funding Lee Harvey Oswald. And you will come to know exactly who Lee Harvey Oswald is and what his history was that led up to his being there in the school book depository. And without falsely giving you the impression that the whole course is just about the Kennedy assassination, which it is not. This is a course that is telling you about the men in the shadows, the men who reach out and control the foreign policy and domestic policies of the United States, and have done so generation after generation, and in learning how it is that they pass the power from one generation to the next, so that this group remains in power and control. And in that regard, we are going to learn about, and this is one of the principal features of this course, we're going to come to learn about and have to come to grips with the fact that these men actually represent a critical part of the American culture, and that they play a major role in providing the sinew and the sort of muscular structure of the United States government in its imperial power and its ability to project its military power into the world, to maintain massive military industrial complex of producing the weaponry and generating the activities around the world that lead to wars, that require the application of this, or appear to require the application of this type of military power and equipment. You will find out about that, and you will also find out about, or your friends will find out about, if you succeed in getting 2 of them, which will count for a few points on your grade average if you bring them in here, so that we have an adequate quorum of our kids here. That you will come to learn about the special role played by the American corporation, a new business vehicle that was created by these men back in 1868 at the end of the American Civil War, that actually established for the first time a business vehicle by means of which these men could own all of the resources of a business enterprise and have absolutely no legal liability whatsoever for whatever it did, so that the owners of the assets would be immunized against legal liability, the management of the corporation would be immunized against legal liability personally, and the board of directors would be immunized against any legal liability. And that the only legal liability for any of the conduct on the part of the corporation would in fact run solely and exclusively to the resources and the financial resources that were in the possession of the corporation at the time any lawsuit was filed against it. Okay? And in this course, you'll come to understand the critical role that new business enterprise played in the ability of these men to rise to a position of such dominant power in the United States. And you'll learn about the historical origins of the Citizens United decision that you've heard so much about, where the United States Supreme Court rendered the opinion that a corporation was actually a person and was entitled to all of the First Amendment rights and Fourth Amendment rights that a citizen possesses. And very importantly, you will find out why that is not true. You will come to understand in this course what the nature of the source is for the fundamental human rights that we possess, that makes it evident that this is not, in fact, a quality that is possessed by a corporation. And that the whole discussion of this will be a particular period, lecture that we'll have on this, which is part of an understanding of the alternative worldviews that people adhere to. But this one that is grounded in the natural law, the existence of a natural law that is the source of these fundamental rights, that these fundamental rights are not the product of a constitution. This simply recognizes that you have them. They don't say, we're the ones giving them to you. It's an entire analysis of the Constitution that understands that this is a set of qualities that we possess as human beings that are not transferable to a corporation. Okay? So that's those are the some of the things that you're going to be discovering in the course, and that we're going to approach this through basically 10 weeks together. And as I say, in each of the 10 weeks, there are going to be 2 lectures in which we get together and we have a 90-minute lecture, and then additional time for questions and answers among us. And that we're going to do at the beginning of the course is we're going to start it today, now that we have these administrative things addressed. We're going to be analyzing the present presidential election and the worldviews that are represented by the different candidates. And we're going to have a special focus here today on the sort of idealist, egalitarian, social democratic worldview of Bernie Sanders and what that represents in American history and culture. And we're going to be discussing Donald Trump and the kind of egotistical, personality-driven, kind of xenophobic, racist, imperialist wedding of corporate power to the executive power of the central government. His entire theory of how he's going to make America great again by empowering the major corporations and business people like himself, and basically putting business people in charge of everything. You've heard him say over and over again, we have lots of really great business people. I'm going to put business people in charge, and they're going to make great deals and make America great again and return us to our one-time position of dominant power in the world. Now, this is a fairly old theme that has existed before. We've seen it in its full fruition in Germany back between 1924 and 1945. But we're seeing it again with Donald Trump, sort of the pure article. And then we're going to talk about Hillary Clinton, who represents sort of a classic American compromise between these two ideological positions, who in fact spends time publicly extolling the virtues of idealism and social democracy, and in espousing a belief in eventually getting to that place of actually effectuating these ideals, but constantly pointing out that it's not possible, that we can't really do it right now, there's not enough support for this right now, there's the political forces opposing this are too strong at the present time, and that therefore we have to actually affirmatively propose an actual program that is rooted in large part in recognizing the dominant power of the corporations and business interests of the country, and understand that the benefits that flow to the other people in the country flow largely from the health of these people. So that we're going to talk about that at some length here in the time we have remaining. But then we're also going to move on in the second week of the course. We're going to be talking about that is the election that we're engaged in right now, not only for the presidency, but also for the United States Senate and the possible control of the United States Senate and the Judiciary Committee of the Senate, which is the one in charge of approving judicial appointments that will control probably 3 of the Supreme Court justices. There's going to be probably, obviously the Scalia's replacement, and then Ruth Bader Ginsburg is going to be retiring, and also Justice Breyer will probably be retiring. So there's 3 Supreme Court justices that are probably going to be appointed by the next President of the United States. And the Senate Judiciary Committee are going to be the ones who are going to have to consent to the nomination. And so that this is the important logistical moment that we find ourselves in here in the country. And then what I want to do in the second week is I want to shift to the larger tactical moment that we find ourselves in here in the United States. And that is, even though it seems like a long ways away for you guys, but we're still in the period that is the post-Cold War period, that virtually all of the other older people that are in the room here with you, all of us lived through that period where the Cold War basically confronted us virtually every day with the possibility that the United States and the Soviet Union would engage in a massive nuclear exchange, totally destroying all of civilization. And it's not to say that there's no chance of that now, but there was a very high chance of that during that entire period. And it turns out that that period of the Cold War actually went on all the way from October of 1917 with the overthrow of the Tsar Alexander of Russia by the Bolshevik Revolution. And the United States sent a foreign military expeditionary force into Russia to try to crush the Bolshevik Revolution, which most of you don't know anything about and have not been told about. And probably but for you and your friends coming to this course, you wouldn't know about it by the time you get done with your education in the university. And so that what we're going to be talking about in the second week is this how important the end of the Cold War is, that had gone on all the way from October of 1917 all the way until December 31st of 1991. And we're going to be talking about the extraordinary set of events that took place right there in the last year of the Cold War that basically set the stage for the chaos that you see now in the Middle East. We're going to be talking about the invasion of the Middle Eastern oil fields by George H.W. Bush, George Bush Sr., immediately upon beginning to get information that the Soviet Union was probably preparing to dissolve, and that he and his Secretary of Defense, Richard Cheney, launched a unilateral military attack into the Middle East and occupied the Middle Eastern oil fields under the ruse of protecting the Kuwaiti royal family against being invaded by Saddam Hussein. We'll talk about this at some length and give you the details of this so that you will probably be the only person you know, except for your 2 friends, will be the only people who know about this, of anybody you know and talk to. So that you're going to have this wonderful experience, as I've had over the years, of sitting and telling someone about this who completely disbelieve you because they're totally ignorant. and they don't know what they're talking about. And so that it's going to give you this wonderful opportunity to start getting used to this. Because this is an important experience for you as educated people to not only know what it is that you need to know so that you can tell other people who don't know anything about this and who actively disbelieve it, and equip you to be able to persuade them without just, looming over them and calling them a bunch of ignoramuses. And be compassionate and considerate about the fact that they don't know this, that they've been subjected to an educational system which has consciously deceived them about this, and so that you can, with compassion and concern for them, share this information in a way that will persuade them that it's true, and that they can then begin to shift their worldview into accommodating this reality, okay? And so that this period after, approaching the end of the Cold War, this long, basically 75-year-long Cold War, from 1917 all the way to the 1992, basically. This is something you're going to learn about in this course. And you're going to, very importantly, you're going to learn about the events that took place not only during the final year of the Cold War, with this invasion and occupation of the Middle Eastern oil fields, but you're going to find out about this extraordinary set of events that took place right at the very end of the Cold War, when on December 31st of 1991, President Gorbachev of the Soviet Union signed the decrees voluntarily dissolving the Soviet Union. And the following Monday morning, that Paul Wolfowitz, the Assistant Secretary of Defense under Dick Cheney in the George H.W. Bush administration, convened a gathering of men in his office in the White House that included Addington, his lawyer, David Addington, Scooter Libby, Elliott Abrams, and a number of others. And they drafted up the 1992, this is now January of 1992, following the December 31st, 1991 dissolution of the Soviet Union, that there was this meeting in which they began to draft the 1992 United States Defense Department Policy Planning Guidance document, in which they advocated that now that the Cold War was over, rather than reducing U.S. military spending, which had been rationalized for 75 years, predicated upon the need to combat and neutralize the Soviet Union, that they advocated increasing the United States military budget so that they could establish full spectrum dominance over the planet, so that they could maintain their continued privileged access to the strategic raw materials needed by members of the new Northern Industrial Alliance, about which you have heard nothing in your life. Okay? Except for that person right there who's now mentioning that she probably has heard about this. But so that you're going to find out about all of this in this course. And you're going to find the details of that 1992 United States Defense Department Policy Planning Guidance document and what its full implications are, and how it led ultimately to the establishment of a project for the new American century. The primary candidate for whom was Marco Rubio. You may have noticed the big banners behind him all the time, the new American century, and that we will have a new American century, the greatest century ever. That all comes from the Project for a New American Century that came directly out of those meetings at the end of the Cold War. And then we're going to move, after analyzing that unique tactical moment that we find ourselves in history, still in the throes of the consequences of those actions that were taken at the end of the Cold War. I'm going to take you back to understanding that a coven of that nature that is represented by the Project for a New American Century, and the members from Donald Rumsfeld to Richard Cheney to David Addington to Elliott Abrams to the others who are all part of that coven, we're going to see that this group has existed before in the United States, has existed continually, as I'm going to make clear to you in the course, and that you're going to start running into quotations from Woodrow Wilson back in 1913, and again, quotations from Franklin Roosevelt in 1934 to 1936, who talk all about the existence of this group. And so that I'm going to want you to tell your friends about this, because it's going to be hard for them to believe this stuff that you're going to be telling them. But for example, I'll just read you a couple of the quotes. You'll see them in your syllabus later on when you look at it later tonight. But for example, Franklin Roosevelt said in this was Wilson said this in 1913, President Woodrow Wilson. He said, quote, it's on page, I guess 3 or 4, on page, well, 5 actually, 1, 2, 3, on page 5 of your syllabus. You can see it, where he says, an invisible empire has been set up in our nation above the forms of democracy, a power so organized, so watchful, so interlocked, so complete, and so pervasive that some of the biggest men in the United States in the fields of commerce, manufacture, and government know that they had better not speak above their breath when they speak in condemnation of this group. And he goes on to say, our middle class is being more and more squeezed out by the process which we have been taught to call the pursuit of personal prosperity by those who are sharing only a tiny fraction of their prosperity with others, such that throughout the Union, people are coming to feel that they have no control over the course of our affairs. We vote, but we are offered only the platforms that they want, and we are allowed to vote only for the men who stand for their platform. But we get virtually nothing in return. We now realize that the machines of both major American political parties are subsidized by these same people, so it is useless to turn to either one of them for direction. Okay? Now, there'll be a lot of other quotes that you're going to hear, not only from Wilson, but Franklin Roosevelt, that talk about these men, that talk about this cabal, this coven of men that exists. And we're going to point out that we want to go back to, after the discussion of this, showing that they've existed all the way from 1913 to 1934 with Franklin Roosevelt, when he makes his observations about them. We're going to go back in this course to the robber baron era. The robber baron era is this very interesting, simple 30-year period. And 30-year periods seem like a lot more to you guys than they seem to some of us who have seen a couple of them go by. And the 30-year period, actually, for example, you go back to when Ronald Reagan was president, before you guys, but just from the time Ronald Reagan was elected president up until now, has covered the 30-year period. This entire period is only 30 years. And there was this 30-year period in American history that goes from the end of the American Civil War in 1868 to basically 1898. There's this 30-year period that is referred to in history as the robber baron era. And this is the era during which they created the American corporation, and they ended up owning stock in these major corporations and sitting on each other's boards of directors, and to form these interlocking boards of directors that controlled the steel industry, the railway industry, the shipping industry, the food industry, the agricultural industry. That you will learn in this course how these men, during a short 30-year period in American history, rose to a position of absolute dominant political and economic power in the United States, and how they chose to use that power to manipulate and control the foreign policy and the domestic policies of the United States government. And we're also then, after we've given you all the bad news about that particular period in history, we're going to cover a thing called the Chautauqua movement. It's a thing that, how many of you have ever heard of the Chautauqua movement? Okay, terrific. So see, that you're going to discover that back in 1874, in the midst of this period of time, between 1868 all the way to 1898, that in the midst of this period, it was recognized by the National Board of Homeland Ministries of the United Methodist Church in the United States. It was recognized that the policies and principles that were being followed by these robber barons were directly contrary to the basic Christian social doctrine of the church, of the Christian church. That basically these forms of conduct were unchristian. That the slave labor of children that are 6 and 7 and 8 years old working in the mines because they're small and can crawl into small places and place explosive charges. The women toiling in the textile mills and inhaling cotton dust and getting brown lung disease and dying with no benefits whatsoever. Just throw them out when this happens. And one can go into a long list of the basic atrocities, basically, of the business practices of these particular men. That this National Board of Homeland Ministries owned a retreat, a religious retreat up on Lake Chautauqua in northern New York, actually out by Buffalo in western New York. And what they did is in 1874, they invited all of the people in the United States who were going to be Sunday school teachers for the United Methodist Church to come to the Chautauqua, Lake Chautauqua, where their religious retreat was, and to be trained there during the summer of 1874. And they would be trained to understand in detail how it was that the practices and policies of the robber barons were contrary to Christian doctrine and Christian social teachings, so that they could go back and teach everybody back in their hometowns about this. And that went on from 1874 to 1878, when the National Board of Homeland Ministries of the United Methodist Church decided that was too slow. That wasn't working. And so what they did is they issued an invitation to all of the social studies teachers in the United States to come for free to their retreat center up in Lake Chautauqua and bring their families with them for the summer of 1878. And what happened is that there was such a number of people came. Hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people came from all across the United States who were so fed up with the policies of the robber barons that they came there to study with them, and that they didn't have adequate facilities for them. They didn't have adequate food for them or shelter for them, etc. And it started raining. And so what they did is they actually had to have all the neighbors all around the whole area put them up in their houses and help feed them. And it was basically the original Woodstock event, another event that happened before you guys were born. But I was driving back from Harvard Law School at a break, and I drove right past Woodstock. It was going on. I didn't even know it was going on. I said, what are all these cars doing here? There were like hundreds of cars parked all around the roads out in the Berkshire Mountains, because I had to drive home from Boston up to Lake George, New York, where I grew up. And there they were, and I didn't know anything about what was happening. But the bottom line is that, that this era that we're talking about, with the Chautauquas that were organized and the training went on, what happened is in the following year, 1789, the National Board of Homeland Ministries of the United Methodist Church had 6 regional gatherings of the Chautauqua. And the same thing happened at each one of them. And tens of hundreds of people came from the social studies departments of the schools to try to get training, to figure out how they could counter these robber barons. And they overflowed. And what happened is eventually there ended up being over 20,000 Chautauqua sessions held in the United States between 1878 up to 1920. And some 40 million people attended these Chautauqua sessions throughout the United States. And they developed the progressive era. And so we're going to study the progressive era and how it rose up out of the Chautauqua movement. And it gave rise to the women's suffrage movement, which manifested in 1919 with the passage of the 19th Amendment, granting women the right to vote for the first time in American history. It gave rise to the American labor movement. It gave rise to the American public education system with John Dewey. It gave rise to the original environmental movement. And it gave rise to the anti-child labor movement, passing the legislation to stop the employment of children. And so this Chautauqua movement that virtually none of you have heard about except one person out of you is something you're going to come to know about. And you're going to come to know about the progressive era and the effect that it had, because it was, in fact, the previous idealist generation. That whole group of people back in that period from basically 1880 all the way through to 1920. That whole era was this huge surge of populist, progressive policy advocacy in the United States, led in large part by the women that had succeeded in getting the vote in the suffrage movement. And so we're going to talk about this, and we're going to talk about the retaliation against this movement on the part of these men that we're talking about, how they generated institutions inside the government that would combat these people, that they established the Federal Bureau of Investigation, that the Attorney General of the United States, Palmer, ended up raiding the homes of people that were involved in the progressive movement. In the labor unions especially, as I mentioned, that they gave rise to the American labor movement. In labor unions were all generated by the Chautauqua movement. And the Palmer raids, very famous in the 1920s, would go in and raid the homes of labor union people, accusing them of being communists. Now see, by 1920, that's 3 years after the Bolshevik Revolution. So you can see right away, following the Bolshevik Revolution in October of 1917, by 1920, you have the robber barons have mobilized in the United States, and they've actually generated an actual American institution of the Federal Bureau of Investigation that immediately starts going after these people who are opposing the policies of the robber barons. So we're going to study about that, and we're going to discover that in 1934, when Franklin Roosevelt was elected in 1932 and became president, when he started to try to implement a number of the progressive measures that were proposed by the Chautauqua movement, that these people that I'm talking about, this coven of men, organized a military coup against Franklin Roosevelt and attempted to recruit the commandant of the United States Marine Corps to mount a military coup d'etat against the American government and kill Franklin Roosevelt and take over the government. Now, this is another thing. that it's very unlikely. Let me ask you this. How many of you had heard about this before? See, that's right. And as I say, that you would go through your entire university career and most likely never hear about it. Because people are afraid of these people still. When you come to the university and you start to say, well, there's certain kind of things that I know we're never going to be told about at the university. And the reason is because people are still afraid of these people. And that's exactly the point. In Washington, D.C., you can't get the Congress people to do anything progressive because they're afraid of these people. Because these people are connected to the Covert Operations Directorate of the Central Intelligence Agency, which is another major institution that was created by these men to engage in criminal covert operations around the world. And the fact is that even though they were prohibited from conducting any policies here inside the United States, they were doing so right from the very beginning. And everybody in the know knows it. And they're afraid of these people. Okay? And so what I want to be able to do is in this course, I want to be able to help you understand why you do not have to be afraid of these people, so that you can tell your relatives and friends and fellow students and fellow co-workers and stuff throughout your life that they do not have to be afraid of these people. Because once you understand that these people get up every morning and put their pants on one leg at a time, just like most everybody else when they get up in the morning and get dressed and go out to work. These are real people. These are specific people that you can identify. And once you've got them targeted, once you know who they are, you can cope with them. What you have a hard time coping with is this vague sense that there's some dangerous element that everybody's afraid of. Like with these quotations that I read, you know, that people don't dare speak above a whisper, you know, when they're talking about them. And for example, there's another one. I'll do another read another one of the quotes. This is Franklin Roosevelt speaking. We must struggle against these enemies of peace, these owners of business and financial monopolies, financial speculators, and the men in charge of reckless banking practices and war profiteering. These forces have come to consider our American government to be a mere appendage of their private business affairs. We must beware that our government is being run by the interests of organized wealth, and that this is just as dangerous as if our government were being run by an organized mob. Never before in all of our history have these forces been so united as they are today. This concentration of corporate power and private wealth is seriously impairing the effectiveness of our American economic system to provide adequate employment opportunities for our people, or adequate capital to our smaller businesses. In short, this concentration of power is impairing our economy from being able to assure an equitable distribution of income and earnings among the people of our nation. Okay? So that this group has been known about, it has been talked about, but for the most part, you aren't taught about it. You aren't taught about it at the university. Again, because university officials are afraid of these people. They're afraid that these people will retaliate against them, because they do. That is exactly what they do. That they have lawyers, they have gun thugs, they have connections into the Central Intelligence Agency, they have connections into the FBI, and they will in fact exercise their power against you if you start to talk about them and you start to tell people about them, because they know if the light of day is shone upon them, they cannot function. And that's why this course is so important for you, is to really come to understand this at this stage of your educational process, whether you're a freshman or whether you're one of the sophomores or junior or senior, that you need to consider going into your graduate school studies and writing about these people, researching about them, writing about them, talk about them, publish works about them, to tell your fellow citizens about these people, because that is the only way to really neutralize these people. And one of the final aspects of this course is that we're going to be talking about the fact that this element has existed inside the United States government ever since the beginning, with Alexander Hamilton. Alexander Hamilton was a lawyer back during the founding of the American Constitution, and he is the one who represented, as their lawyer, major mercantilists and bankers and financial institutions. And he was instrumental in the process of writing the United States Constitution, keeping it from being the truly liberal, natural law-inspired document that James Madison and Thomas Jefferson wanted it to be, so that the people couldn't vote for president. You can't vote for president today. And most people don't even know that. You vote for electors, who then go into the Electoral College and are legally free to vote for anybody they choose. Okay? You hear the discussion going on now with regard to the attempt to stop Donald Trump from getting the nomination. They're talking about, well, the delegates who've been selected through this voting process in the primaries, in the primary elections, and in the gatherings of people to choose their delegates, that they go to Cleveland, and they're entirely free to vote for whoever they want. And there are people lobbying away at them right now not to vote for Trump, even though they were elected as a Trump delegate. Okay? And that's what Kasich is depending upon, because Kasich is the only one who, in all of the polls, stands any chance of beating Hillary Clinton. Donald Trump is going to get wiped out by 60-40, by Hillary Clinton, and he's going to be wiped out by even more than that, by Bernie Sanders. Now, Bernie Sanders isn't going to get the nomination either, no groaning, please, that even though most anybody with a political sensitivity above room temperature, wants to have him chosen because of his idealistic and progressive policies. The sad reality is that that Hillary Clinton has the superdelegates, and the superdelegates are not elected at all. The superdelegates have been designated by the Democratic Party, which is the preferable party in many people's minds to the Republican Party, but even the Democratic Party, that they have these superdelegates who are all of the elected officials. The governors, the senators, the congressmen, they all go to the convention and they all get a vote. And there's 726 of them, and she already has 478 of them already committed to vote for her. And so Bernie Sanders has to beat Hillary Clinton in all of the chosen, voted for delegates, has to beat her by 476 delegates to even tie her.
Just to clarify, they can change their mind at any point up until the convention.
Well, no, not now, but they're getting set to change the rules. In the Republican convention, they have a rules committee that is organized by the delegates when they come, and they can change it, and that's what they're lobbying to do right now. They're trying to officially change the rules so that they're not bound on even the first ballot. because under the present rules, if you're elected as a Trump delegate or a Cruz delegate, or a Rubio delegate, that you have to come and on the first ballot, you have to vote for the person that you were elected to represent. But on the second ballot, you're allowed to be free. And that's what they call a brokered convention. But what they're in the process of planning to do now is they're talking about this, saying, look the fact of the matter is the rules are what control, and every single convention makes their own rules. Because the convention of both parties are plenipotentiary. When they come, they're in power. They are the power in the party. And so they make up their own rules. There are a set of standing rules that have applied in many of the conventions, but they're authorized to change them. And that's, strangely enough, what Bernie Sanders is advocating. He's saying that he wants all of the delegates who have been elected for Hillary Clinton, or the superdelegates who have already publicly pledged to vote for Hillary Clinton, he wants them to change their mind before they get there, and so that they can vote for whoever they want. And that's why you hear him making the argument that all of the polls show that Bernie Sanders beats Donald Trump by 20 points. Whereas as of right now, that Hillary Clinton beats him by 11 points. That she'll basically beat him 55-45 right now. But she wants to be able to beat him 60-40, like Lyndon Johnson beat Goldwater back in 1964. You all remember that. And anyway, so that's what's going on right now. So what I'm saying to you is that Alexander Hamilton, back at the very founding of the American Constitution, is the one that said, we don't want the rabble voting for the presidency. So what they do is they had the states, or the colonies, in the very first states in the United States, the people vote for the state legislature. And the state legislature chooses their senator, not the people. Didn't even vote for the United States Senate. And then they vote for electors who choose the president. So there was this whole scheme that was set up in the original founding of the Constitution. We'll talk about it at some length. How Alexander Hamilton succeeded in keeping the Constitution from being a genuine democracy. And that it was in fact a representative government, where there are representatives that are chosen by the people, and that they pick the president and they pick the Senate. And so that what we're going to see is that it wasn't just that he happened to favor kind of a theory of elitism, but he represented the elite. He was the attorney that represented the mercantile class and the merchant bankers and the financial people in the colonies. And he married the daughter of Philip Schuyler, a very wealthy family in New York, the governor, and he represented all of them. And what we're going to discover is that this is a fairly common theme that we discover, that the attorneys play this really major dominant role in representing the elite and getting the government to function on behalf of their interests, as distinct from the interests of the people or the country as a whole. And this has been going on since the very beginning with Alexander Hamilton. And that it manifested itself in stark relief with Allen Dulles, whom we'll talk about at some length in the course. That just to give you a brief overview on this in the last few minutes before we start having some questions and going back and forth here, is that the Secretary of State of the United States under Benjamin Harriman in 1893 was a fellow by the name of John W. Foster. John W. Foster is the Secretary of State who oversaw the overthrow of the Hawaiian Islands and the seizing of them by the United States in Guam and the Marshall Islands. That they overthrew all of these islands in the Pacific and established the United States hegemony over them, and was the Secretary of State that was involved in planning the overthrow of the island of Cuba, which was effectuated in 1898, just 5 years later. But he was the Secretary of State in 1893, and his grandson was born in 1893, Allen Dulles. And his brother, John Foster Dulles, had been born earlier. And at that point, John W. Foster retired, went and bought a retreat center up on one of the Great Lakes up in northern New York, and in fact began tutoring Allen Dulles and John Foster Dulles on this imperialist worldview. And he was accompanied by his son-in-law, who married the eldest daughter of John W. Foster, Robert Lansing, his name was, who became the Secretary of State under Woodrow Wilson. And these two boys, John Foster Dulles and Allen Dulles, were raised by these two guys, taking them out on boats, fishing out on the lakes, spewing all day long at them this imperialist worldview and training them in the imperialist worldview. And the fact is, Allen Dulles, when he was 8 years old, wrote an essay in support of the Boers in South Africa, the Dutch colonialists. And he wrote an essay when he was 8 years old supporting them in taking over South Africa. And John W. Foster was so proud of this, he got it published and used to carry copies of it around with him, giving it to all of his friends, promoting Allen Dulles and John Foster Dulles while they were still children, to get them to eventually be John Foster Dulles, the Secretary of State of the United States, as his grandfather had been, as his uncle had been, and then he was. And Allen Dulles became the first civilian director of the Central Intelligence Agency, running covert operations around the world. But prior to that time, both John Foster Dulles and Allen Dulles, at the end of World War I, we'll go into a lot of these details, but at the end of World War I, you've all heard about, I believe, the Versailles Treaty. The Versailles Treaty was entered into at the end of World War I, and there were provisions put into the Treaty of Versailles which imposed reparations requirements on Germany. Those you've heard about, nodding up and down. Yes, Allen Dulles and John Foster Dulles drafted those provisions. They were at the Versailles Treaty negotiations, handpicked by their uncle, Robert Lansing, who was the Secretary of State, put them into those sessions. They drafted the reparations in, imposing the reparations requirements on Germany. And then Allen Dulles was appointed to be the lawyer for Germany, who would negotiate the loans that would be given to them to pay the reparations. It turns out at the same time, he was a senior partner in the law firm of Sullivan and Cromwell that represented the financial private investment house of Brown Brothers Harriman. And Brown Brothers Harriman were the company in which the corporations existed who were owed the reparations. And the people that gave the loans to Germany to pay the reparations were other clients of Brown Brothers Harriman. And here's Allen Dulles, the senior partner for the law firm representing Brown Brothers Harriman, negotiating the loans to go to the German government to pay other clients of Brown Brothers Harriman, and in building up the German war machine between 1924 and 1934, and something you will never be told anywhere else, that on January 3rd of 1933, sitting in the meeting in Germany, was John Foster Dulles and Allen Dulles authorizing Adolf Hitler, who was in the meeting, to become the Chancellor of Germany, as soon as he agreed to recognize the loans that had been given to Germany and would agree to pay them. So that it was John Foster Dulles and Allen Dulles who greenlighted Adolf Hitler to become the Chancellor of Germany. And in fact, it was the Brown Brothers Harriman firm that financed the creation of the bank, the Union Bank of New York, under the CEO of Brown Brothers Harriman at the time, and you're going to love this one, George Herbert Walker, who is the grandfather of George Herbert Walker Bush, George H.W. Bush. It was his grandfather that was, in fact, the CEO for Brown Brothers Harriman. While Allen Dulles was the lawyer for Brown Brothers Harriman and a senior partner in the firm of Sullivan and Cromwell, who represented them. Okay? So what you're going to find out in this class is what has been going on behind the scenes of who the people are that are in charge. That it's no mere coincidence that, in fact, George H.W. Bush was chosen to be president of the United States, because he represents a power elite behind the scenes that his grandfather had been in charge of, George Herbert Walker, back in the 1920s, all the way up to 1924, when he left Brown Brothers Harriman and turned over the CEO position to his son-in-law, Prescott Bush, who was married to his oldest daughter. Okay? And so that's how this thing runs. So you need to understand who these people are and what they're doing and the kind of decisions that they're making. Because when George Herbert Walker left as the CEO for Brown Brothers Harriman and went and set up the Union Bank of New York, the Union Bank of New York, through its subsidiary in the Netherlands, the Bank of Shipping and Commerce, the head of which was this guy Fritz Thyssen, are the ones that financed the building of the national headquarters for the Third Reich of Germany. And we're funding them through Allen Dulles, getting the loans from the clients of Brown Brothers Harriman to rebuild the war machine of Germany so that it could become the bulwark against Bolshevism in Europe. Okay? So that this is the story that you're going to find out about in this course. And you're going to learn what's been going on behind the scenes, who the people were, what the actions were that they took, and why this is so important in understanding how the American government works. Because in order to fix it, you have to know what's broke. And that's what's, and the real challenge is that there's an old Irish aphorism that I like to quote a lot. The Irish refer to Ireland as the old sod. And there's an old Irish aphorism that says, well, the old sod, it's not what it used to be, but then it never was. Okay? So, but I don't want you in this course to lose faith in what we're all about. It's the point of this course is to protect you by letting you know what's really going on behind the scenes, so that even knowing that, you can still have faith and you can still engage in the existential process of making the country everything that you've been taught that it promises to be. Because if you go in naively thinking you're going to be able to just pretend, like what you learned in high school civics is true, you're vulnerable, because somebody slaps one of these secrets on you and you basically fall down and go, oh no, what do you know? I never knew that was true. I guess it's all a big fat lie, and it must be that they're telling me that Santa Claus exists. No. The reality is that it is true that from the very beginning this element has been functioning inside the American government, but there has at the same time been the Madisonian and Jeffersonian Democrats, the people who in fact were advocating an egalitarian, idealistic set of principles to run the government, wanting to have popular democracy in elections and free speech, etc. So but you need to understand that this has been a dialectical dynamic that's been going on in American politics. And we see it going on right today in this confrontation between Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton. I mean, we have the great advantage of the fact that Hillary Clinton is going to be our first woman president now, which is preposterous in itself that it's taken all this time to have a woman be president of the United States. I mean, everybody knows that that's stunningly shocking, but it's still true. And so the reality is that she's up against Trump. Thank goodness. So that, that he is so flagrant and so blatant, that he's such a misogynist that, that I hope she picks Elizabeth Warren as her vice presidential candidate, just to give Trump the full opportunity to flame out right in front of everybody, but she may not. They're all going to go, ooh, you can't pick a woman to be your vice president. And you can say, well, gee, there have been men presidents and vice presidents all the way through the history of the country. Why can't there be two women? But they're all going to say, oh, you can't do that, because you'll lose the blue-collar men, white male vote, who will just vote against them because they're women. Okay? So that we're going to be talking about the election. We're going to be talking about the candidates. We're going to be talking about the larger context in which all of this is going on. And in case I hadn't mentioned it to you, you should ask your friends to come to the course because it's going to be extremely informative, very interesting, and I hope it's going to change your life and make your life more important, more vibrant, and much better informed and more controversial than you probably had intended before you signed up for the course. Okay? So there's just the introduction to the course. We've got another 10, 15 minutes before we're done here. So I hope that this has stimulated some questions. Okay. Oh, you need to, if you would, that Noah is the TA here. He's a graduate here. He's in fact been one of the students in one of our earlier courses. And he's going to be the TA. I want you to sign in with him and up there, right over there, and give us your name and your email contact so we can stay in direct communication with you, so that if anything else comes up quickly that we want to get an additional reading to you or something that we might want you to take a look at, we can have your names and addresses. Now let's have some questions. So, pictures. Oh yeah. And I want to get all the students in first, and then I'll have them do it. Okay. Sophia, you have a question?
Oh, no.
Oh no, you were just okay. All right. I thought it was just force of habit. I was just okay. Okay. Yes. Really do. And tell me your names when you get started too. Let's start in the back. Yes.
Maddie. Could you go over the 5 different majors that you have for it?
Yep.
5 majors. Last time it was only 2.
No, I know that. We're improving. I mean, we got history, politics, legal studies, sociology, and philosophy. But you do have to request it. You have to petition them. But they've agreed that if you petition them, that they'll make the decision on a case-by-case basis, and you'll probably all get to do it.
And I'd like to add community studies to that.
Have they agreed?
Yeah.
Oh, all right. So then, and you've also got community studies. Okay? So there's another whole slew of students we're going to have in here, right? Okay? So great. Now, yes. What, Andrew?
I was just wondering if you think it might be too early to discount the Sanders campaign, because I feel like if he does win in real delegates, there could be a different situation with superdelegates, or at the very least, protests at the Democratic convention.
Yeah. With emphasis on at the very least. Yeah. That's here it is right now. That as of right now, Hillary Clinton has I think like 360 or something more elected delegates than Bernie has, and then she has the additional 457 superdelegates. You're right. It's conceivable that those people could change their mind, and that what it is that Bernie would have to win virtually all of the remaining primaries, and he would have to win them all by 70% to 30% or more. in order for him to catch her in the elected delegates, okay? And so what he's doing is he's not, so far, he's not banking on that. What he's banking on is the polls that are showing him beating Trump by another 8 or 10 points more than Hillary. And so he's trying to appeal to those superdelegates by saying, look, you want to select the candidate that in fact is going to give you the largest margin of victory over these people because you want the coattails of the people voting for the senators. So that's what he's going to be arguing. So that we have to keep our eye on this stuff. But he won by 70%, in 75% and 82%. In the last three, in Hawaii, in Washington State, and what was it? In Alaska. That's right. So and he won by 70% earlier in Utah. But the part of the challenge is that in the general election, for example, in Utah, that whoever wins the majority of the votes in Utah gets all of their electoral votes. And so in Utah, even though he can win by 80% of the Democrats, all dozen of them in Utah, the problem is that those are in very conservative states, except for Washington State, and he's going to win Oregon, and hopefully he'll win California, which is the big 174 delegates, but they're still proportional. That all of the delegates in the Democratic primaries are proportional, and so that even when he beats her like that, Hillary still keeps getting more delegates. And the real dynamic that one should be hoping for is that if in fact that Bernie continues to win, even if he doesn't win by the 72% that he has to win on the average from over her, that he will continue to pull her to the left on her policies because she's willing to go there. She keeps arguing that she doesn't support those positions because she doesn't think that people will adequately support them. But if the evidence shows that they will, she'll tend to go over there. And the key is to have us all mobilize and try to get her to stay there instead of gravitating back toward the center. And the great advantage of Trump being her opponent is she can't quite tell where he is. It isn't as though you have a clear ideologue like Cruz or even Rubio, where you can figure out where he is on the political spectrum, how far to the right he is, so that she can come all the way over to be just barely to the left of him, which is where she would tend to gravitate to. Okay? But with Trump, you can't tell where he is or what he's going to say, and so that she can't quite figure out the advantages. She can't quite figure out where to go. And so maybe she'll actually take a position of substance. No, she might. There's always a chance. And we want to be fair. Look we're in a situation where, that we actually realize that one of the two of them, either Bernie Sanders or Hillary, are going to be the next president, almost certainly, over Trump. And when our choice is between a Democratic socialist and the first woman president of the United States, you aren't going to go too far wrong, okay, on this election. And so we need to be realistically prepared for that. Okay, Sophia?
Dr. Sheehan, last time I was in a class of yours, you were fully behind Senator Sanders, and you were absolutely rah-rah Bernie Sanders. You didn't have a single positive thing to say about Hillary, and I can't believe that you're compromising. Has somebody told you that you need to compromise on this issue and teach a class that way? Because if that were the case, then I would be out of this class right now.
That's
I don't think it is.
Well, you should be. You should be if that were true. No, what I'm trying to do right now is trying to evaluate, based upon what the electoral process has been so far, what the likelihood is, so that we can plan for this and to engage in all the activities we can. Because I think that the probabilities of, for example, Bernie Sanders being able to win more than 72% of all of the votes in New York State, which is Hillary's, where she was the United States Senator from, are not likely because all of the machinery of the Democratic National Committee are basically behind Hillary. So all of the mechanics of the elections in the Rules Committee and everything are going to be wanting to have her be president. And I'll tell you one of the reasons why is because a substantial portion of the Republican National Committee has more confidence in Hillary Clinton as a Republican than they do Donald Trump. Hillary Clinton is half Republican. She's a Republicrat. It's from the Democratic Leadership Conference.
The next class.
Oh, the next class is coming in. Okay, so you needn't worry that anyone has asked me to compromise on this. I want everybody to be as rah-rah as they can for the most